Welcome back to Returning to Wholeness. I'm your host, Vanessa Mincola, and this is a space for returning to the body, tending to the roots of our well-being, and remembering what it feels like to feel safe, connected, and at home with ourselves. Together, we'll explore holistic health, emotional healing, spirituality, and the messy, beautiful experience of being human. For today's episode, I want to talk about something I've been thinking a lot about as summer starts to wind down: letting go. I've always been really sensitive to the changing of seasons. And when I was younger, this particular transition from summer into fall always felt a little sad to me. Summer always meant freedom and long days and warm weather and beach time and less structure, more fun. Fall felt like something was ending. School was starting again, the days were getting shorter, everything was changing. There's almost this feeling of wanting to hold on to summer for just a little bit longer. And I think even as adults, we do this constantly. Not necessarily with summer, but with the seasons of our lives, so to speak. Relationships, friendships, versions of ourselves, our bodies, our expectations. These are things that we desperately want to remain exactly as they are because they've become familiar to us. And when they start to change, our instinct is often to ask, how do I keep this or stop this from changing? So I want to ask today, why are we so quick to interpret endings as something to avoid? It is a fact of life that nothing is meant to remain in full bloom forever. Life itself is cyclical. Everything's always ebbing and flowing. Things are just built that way. And there's something that's almost funny about watching nature change while simultaneously expecting ourselves not to. There are seasons for growth, seasons for expansion, and there's seasons for shedding, returning inward, resting, and releasing. Nothing is meant to remain in full bloom forever. So why do we put so much pressure on ourselves to do exactly that? We want to feel happy, healthy, motivated, productive, and certain all the time. We want our relationships and our bodies and our lives to remain exactly as they are during their best seasons. And when they don't, we assume that something went wrong. But there really isn't any right or wrong when it comes to change. There's an old fable that one of my teachers used to tell about a farmer and his horse. One day, the horse runs away, and the whole town says to the farmer, "Oh, that's such bad luck." And the farmer's only response is, "Good luck, bad luck, who knows?" The next day, the horse comes back with a whole field of horses. And the town says, "Oh, that's such good luck." The farmer's response still remains the same. Good luck, bad luck, who knows? The next day, the farmer's son breaks his leg. Once again, the town says, "Oh my goodness, we're so sorry, that's such bad luck." And once again, the farmer's only reply is good luck, bad luck, who knows? The next day, the military's coming through recruiting young and able bodies to join the army and fight in the war. Due to his broken leg, the farmer's son gets to stay home with his family. The town says, "Oh, that's such good luck." And once again, the farmer says the same thing. Good luck, bad luck, who knows? So the purpose of this fable is, of course, to show us that life has a funny way of surprising us. There are all kinds of opportunities and rewards hidden inside some of the most challenging things that we encounter. And when we judge the situation based on the surface level interpretation, we miss out on big chances for growth and transformation. So I think part of the reason why we're so quick to judge life and all of its circumstances is because we've learned to equate performance with success. I think society and in some cases upbringing have conditioned us to believe that success is measured by how long something lasts. Relationships, careers, health. If things change direction, we immediately think we must have done something wrong, made the wrong choice. You feel great for 6 months and then you go through a difficult period, well, you must have lost all your progress. Or you finally feel certain about your life and then something makes you question everything and now you're lost again. But I think this ebb and flow is natural. Endings and change don't compromise value. Everything is temporary. That doesn't make it meaningless. I think we have to become more flexible around what we consider progress and success. And I always tell the people that I work with, never make your success contingent upon specific outcomes. Never wait for your personal expectations to be fulfilled in order to celebrate yourself and your efforts and your life. We can benefit immensely from challenging ourselves to step back and take a bigger picture view. Sure, your nervous system is literally always going to be wired to predict and prevent disaster. So when things change, it's hard not to jump to negative conclusions. But I think it's so helpful for our health, our vitality, and our happiness, and our growth to challenge that negative bias, to step away from the situation and view it through objective lenses instead of judgmental ones, to just observe the change, and yes, to prepare ourselves as best we can for what's to come, but to save room for the best possible case scenarios too. The same way that we can't avoid endings, we can't force them either. So this is another layer I've been thinking about. Sometimes we want to let go of something in order to attempt to control a specific outcome. We want our sickness to go away or our grief to stop tormenting us. We want out of the stress and the frustration and the disappointment. Taoism teaches us, if we want something to shrink, we must first allow it to expand. So every time you find yourself running away from something or attempting to force an ending, remember this. Another great teacher, Ido Portal, says, attention decreases tension. This is the same teaching within a different context. What you bring your loving awareness to is what will soften. When you grip, cling, push, shove, and avoid, your force will always be met with resistance. When you approach life instead from a place of curiosity and compassion, the tension fades. The anger softens. The grief can move through you and with you. The ending occurs on its own, not when we try to control it. So make room for what you feel without allowing that feeling to dictate your next move. Be with the heaviness without allowing it to consume you. Allow the anger, the fear, the sadness to take up space. Your attention will soften its tension. It will expand, and then it will shrink. The natural ebb and flow of life will occur without your forceful or fearful hand. Your grief and your hope are two sides to the same coin. Emotions are not mutually exclusive. Lightness and heaviness, they coexist. That is the Tai Chi circle. That is the duality of life. Even if I'm grieving, I can also be hopeful. Sometimes it's hard to remember that there's hope if we've become consumed by our grief. But this, again, is where we have to pause and zoom out a little bit, to challenge ourselves to see the whole picture, to tell the story through a different lens. without trying to bypass or override the other stories. Stay with the grief, but allow the hope to take up space too. We can be totally terrified of change and still be excited by possibility. Grief and hope can coexist. Peace requires us to develop the capacity to hold both. The same things that scare us have the power to motivate and inspire us. And learning to understand the difference between living from fear and living from love is a hugely underrated life hack. Fear has this gripping, clinging energy. My father always used to say to me, force is always met with resistance. The same things we are afraid of have the capacity to motivate and inspire us too. The story that we tell colors the circumstances with different lenses. When we tell a fear-based story, we get stuck in that gripping, clinging, forceful frequency. We cannot live from alignment in that place. Funny enough, I was watching an old Dr. Phil episode last night that was sort of talking about the same thing, but in a different context. He was interviewing people with relationship commitment challenges, and he showed this visual demonstration of the main elements that drive choices in human behavior. And at the bottom of this pyramid were safety and survival needs, and then a little higher on the pyramid we saw things like fear, love, reward, spiritual attainment, and so on. His point, though, was exactly the same as mine. When we live in a fear-based reality, we perpetuate our pain. And this is the irony. We attempt to avoid change in order to prevent our fear from ruining our lives, and we still end up stuck in an otherwise painful place. So these people avoiding commitment in romance are avoiding the fear of loss, but they're perpetuating a different kind of pain. It's one of loneliness. So Dr. Phil's point was, what would happen if you took the leap? Sure, there's a couple of potentially painful outcomes, but what about the dozens of potential outcomes in between? And like the Zen fable says, are any of these outcomes actually inherently good or bad? No way. They just are. And when we stop resisting them and start taking that holistic view of life and its circumstances, we remain open to the possibility of a silver lining and the growth and transformation that comes along with it. So a piece of advice that I'll give to you to take away from this episode is to honor the space in between each season of life. Sometimes this liminal space is the hardest thing for us to contend with, because the uncertainty that lives there is uncomfortable. Letting go and surrendering, it's a lot easier when we know what's replacing the thing that we're releasing. And we can be confident that something better is coming. And we want reassurance and evidence that this change is going to be worthwhile. And I think that humans are referred to as creatures of habit for this reason. Change is scary because it's unpredictable, so we avoid it. We find every possible reason to prevent it from happening. That is living from fear, though. That is stifling. And it's robbing you of the very thing that makes you human. The uncertainty, the fear, the struggle that lives there in that liminal space, that is where we find our resilience. I'll quote Ido Portal again. I was listening to him speak recently about this idea that we have to embrace the mystery in life. We don't learn or grow from doing the things that are predictable or familiar to us. We find strength and discipline and pride in the scary liminal space. This is literally how we gain confidence. By doing the hard things even though it's hard, and maybe even especially because it's hard, and then loving ourselves through it. In nature, there's an entire season that's devoted to decay. We call it fall. There's another season that's entirely devoted to dormancy. We call it winter. Along with winter comes stillness, conservation, and rest. And then it gives way to spring, new growth. So, what looks like nothing is happening above ground doesn't mean that nothing is happening. There are seasons in our lives that work the same way. Periods where we're not supposed to know what growth awaits us on the other side. Periods where we're processing, resting, integrating. The absence of visible growth doesn't mean that we have stopped growing. So I'm going to bring it back to you, your life. I want you to think for a moment about what you are being asked to release. What are you carrying right now that might belong to a season that's already changing? Maybe it's an expectation, a timeline, a belief about where you thought you'd be by this age, a role that you've played for a really long time, a version of your body that you're constantly comparing yourself to. Maybe it's something heavy, resentment, guilt, the need for somebody to finally understand you, or an apology that you might never receive. Ask yourself what it would look like to loosen your grip. Spend a moment living in the wholeness of that idea. Move through the grief that comes along with the idea of this change. Hold space for the frustration, the stuckness, the guilt, the blame, whatever arises. Just meet it. Without any judgment, just awareness. And a whole lot of compassion for yourself. Realize that this heaviness is valid, but it's part of what you've been holding on to subconsciously to avoid future pain. And by attempting to control the future, you're also perpetuating the pain in your present. Now, let's flip over this coin and let's highlight the hope that lives on the other side of it. Remind yourself why this heavy thing needs to be released. Bask in the brightness of the opportunities that lie just on the other side of this thing ending. Let that faith water the seeds of change and allow both your grief and your hope to take up space in this liminal place. Sometimes wholeness and healing can look like subtraction. In the first episode of Returning to Wholeness, I talked about healing not being a destination, about loosening our attachment to what progress is supposed to look like and learning how to show up for ourselves wherever we happen to be in our journey. Letting go is another part of that. We tend to think that healing requires more supplements and more practices, more improvement. Remember how we said that fear has a gripping and clinging energy? Well, so does this more mindset. Healing won't happen in a fearful frequency. Stop grasping. Stop clinging. Start trusting. Recognize that sometimes it's not about more. Sometimes it's about letting go to make space for new beginnings. My father always used to talk about the concept of addition through subtraction. The general theme suggests that in order to support our bodies and our health, we have to take away the things that are harming them. And this requires honest conversations with ourselves about the things that don't fit anymore. Food habits, lifestyle habits, jobs, relationships. And then loving ourselves enough to put them down. Letting go is an act of love in this sense. Yes, it is hard. But as Joe Dispenza says, when it's the hardest, it matters the most. Also, look at nature. What falls and decays is what fertilizes what grows next. The things that we release don't necessarily disappear from our story. They all have something to teach us. They become part of the soil of what's yet to bloom. We don't have to drag it into the next season for it to remain part of who we are. So, as we move toward another changing season, maybe we can allow nature to remind us of something we've forgotten. Nothing is meant to remain in full bloom forever. If you're standing somewhere between what was and whatever's coming next, I'll encourage you to release the urge to rush through it. Give yourself permission to live in the uncertainty for a little while. You don't have to turn your grief into gratitude before you're ready, or to try and convince yourself that everything happens for a reason. Just embrace the liminal space as an opportunity to trust yourself enough to recognize when the season of your life is changing, and to honor what once was while making space for what is yet to come. Thank you for listening. See you next time.